As a software engineer, I had seen cables that ranged from as thin as 1/4 of an inch in diameter to thicker than the width of my thumb. I had also seen red ones, blue ones, green ones, almost every color of the rainbow. I had never seen cables like the one I saw that day. Also, I had met many cable installers, aka cablers. Most of them had chilled, laid-back, and friendly attitudes. Others seemed to care more about their work, but managed to have small conversations with customers to maintain professionalism. The cable installer my company hired that day did not have any of these traits. I didn't need a degree in psychology to know this guy didn't run on the same operating system as the rest of them. When the rest of his face sat in a neutral position, his eyes still had a certain excitable spark behind them. It was as if his mind could never rest. Also, his arms and legs seemed beyond his control. They seemed to pull him in different directions against his will. I noticed this most when I shook his hand, and it seemed to push mine forward toward the cable room behind me. He also wasn't very sociable. I greeted him and he greeted me. I told him my boss wanted me to watch his work. He said that was all right. Then he moved past me into the cable room. Most professionals, I believe, wouldn't have acted like that. His behavior didn't bother me, however. I welcomed it. When my boss told me to keep an eye on the cabler, apparently there had been a case of someone slacking off. Conversations were just the first thing that my mind began to dread. The second was having to give up the pleasure that I felt while coding for a few hours. I could get so in the zone that I could go hours into overtime without looking up. All the world would just slip away. I'd forget about my problems, like the fights I'd had with my wife about staying at work late. The cabler seemed to have the same attitude as me about his job. The man dropped the boxes he had carried into the cable room with rhythmic thunks. He then pulled out all the cables and made thwopping sounds as he slapped them onto the floor. It took him 3 minutes to get them all out. In another few minutes, he had plugged over 50 cables. All the while, I caught a blissful look on his face. As he worked, I got a good look at the cables. They seemed to have diameters of about 1/2 inch thick. That was the only normal feature about them. Color-wise, they all had patterns like stripes and polka dots on them. Shape-wise, they seemed to naturally hold curves rather than laying straight. This made the cable network look like a chaotic mess. By the time I realized this cabler could be a fraud and or a prankster, the man had already plugged in a few hundred cables. As I went over to confront him, that's when I noticed it. The cables were moving on their own. They made snake-like jerking motions back and forth. It seemed as though they wanted to free themselves from their plug-ins. Sir, I said, should they be doing that? The cabler installer turned to me and then looked where I was pointing. His eyes grew wide and his hands shot forward. Each grabbed a handful of cables. Unfortunately, the speed of the motion only resulted in him freeing these cables from their plugs. The freed ends began convulsing wildly, stabbing the air and throwing themselves about. Many of them scratched the cabler's skin and caused it to bleed. As the flurry of cables continued, I just managed to notice that the drops of blood disappeared each time a cable and dropped down. Soon, one of the cables managed to orient itself so that when it hit the cabler's skin, it pierced right through it. The cabler grunted and let go of the cables. He tried to pull the cable out. Under his fingers, I saw the sections of the cable bulge and shrink. It was drinking. More cables plunged into the cabler's arms in rapid succession. Ones that had fallen to the floor pierced his legs. The moment that they stabbed him, they began drinking. I swore and rushed forward. I grabbed the cables attached to each of his arms and yanked at them, but they wouldn't budge. As I continued to try, some of the still free cables turned to me and began stabbing at my arm. I dodged them for as long as I could, but one managed to dive into my wrist and straight through the bone. I let out a wail, let go of the other cables, and tried to free my wrist. The cabler reached forward and tore the cable out of me, leaving a bloody hole. Then he pointed to the door. "Go," the cabler said. "But," I said, "don't worry about me. This is my job, and I love it." I crept backward because the statement had bewildered me. As I did, more cables freed themselves from their connectors and made beelines for the cabler. As they all began piercing his flesh, he didn't make a sound. He sank into a sitting position, laid back until his shoulders hit the floor, and sighed. With my heart in my throat, I rushed to get my boss. By the time we got back there, the cables and the cabler had disappeared. They couldn't even find any trace of either of them on the security footage. All that they saw was me, looking and reacting to seemingly nothing. It was deemed that I had a nervous breakdown, and, to my horror, I was given 2 weeks' leave. When I tried to use the bloody hole in my arm, which somehow remained, as proof of my sanity, they dismissed it as a self-inflicted wound. During those 2 weeks, I spent a holiday in the warmth of a tropical sun and amongst the beauty of tropical flowers. While I was there, I thought a lot about the incident. The day I got back to work, I handed in my 2 weeks' notice. The recent trend in tiny house builds intrigued me. Everything from turning a shed into a home, a shipping container, or even a van fascinated me. How many of these people moved out of city living and into isolation living off the land by growing their own food and gardens made from recycled materials had me wondering if I could do something like that. I recently broke it off with my girlfriend and wanted to move out of the city. One too many break-ins, nasty bouts with slumlords, and the general consensus that the world seemed broken made me long for a simpler life. So I decided to take a risk and try it for myself. I first inquired about suitable land that allowed for city water and electric hookup. My friend Micah referred me to reach out to a friend of his father's, Dave. I knew that he had loads of property in a wooded area not far from Columbus. The gentleman in question often allowed campers to rent his land for the scenic nature experience. He made a lot of money in the summer months, but is he interested in letting me rent and build a house on his property? I got his number from my friend and called him to discuss it. Yellow. Hi, my name is Kurt. I was referred to you by Micah Ashley regarding some rental property that may be available. Micah, you say? Yes, he's a friend. Good guy, I said. I got a spot. What do you want to do? Are we talking camping for a weekend or a week? I'm looking for an area I can rent to build on, actually. I'm trying to downsize, and I was told you might be someone to reach out to. There was a long silence, and I had to look at the phone to ensure he hadn't hung up. Yep, I got a place. You can come to meet me tomorrow, and I'll give you a tour of the property and we can discuss payment. The next day I met Dave at the large property. We discussed what I wanted to do, make a home on the land, and pay monthly rent. He seemed eager to rent the property to me. But there was a stipulation. I need the full year's rent up front, and you can do anything you like out here. The only thing I ask is that you're quiet because the horses get spooked a little easily. I thought about it, and then finally agreed. Dave said he would even help me by getting me in contact with one of his contractor friends. The cost was a little bit more than I had anticipated, but it was worth it. I was going to own my own home on nearly 10 acres of land with only one neighbor. I was also given free rein on how I wanted it constructed. So as promised, my journey began. I found one of those shipping containers on eBay from a guy in Pennsylvania who was selling it for $650. I just had to pay to haul it back. I, once again, was assisted by Dave, who just happened to have a truck to haul it. It was nice to be living so close to a guy that was that kind. I could set up the unit and begin work on the interior immediately. I didn't make it have a ton of extra features. I was mainly going for a couple of windows, a bed, and a space to store my things. The contractor that Dave sent me was good and helped me with the design, but I put everything together. I'm proud of what I came up with. The few things I didn't expect was that I could get running water, but the toilet didn't flush as well as I liked. I had almost decided on a compost toilet. Still, Dave said that of all the things, he did not allow the dumping of any kind on his property, nor did he want me creating a large garden bed, which seemed odd to me because he'd been so cool about everything else. So that meant the composting garden was out, unless I grew things in boxes on my makeshift patio. So after a few months, I was settled in. It was a nice and quiet place to rest my head. When they said that nature was healing, they didn't lie. I spent most of my time working and sitting on my new deck. It was peaceful and calming. It wasn't long after the first month that I noticed something about my new tiny house. While it was exactly like one of those tiny house storage container homes you would see on those home garden type television shows, there was just something that began to make me feel uneasy. I woke one morning to the sound of my shower running. When I got out of bed, I could have sworn I saw someone running out of my sliding doors that led to my new patio. I never jumped out of bed so fast. I ran to the door and saw nothing, where I should have seen someone running away. I called Dave that very morning after the sun came up. I asked him if he had seen anyone on the property. He said he'd check his security cameras, which he did while I was talking to him. Dave said he couldn't see anything unusual, and I was more than welcome to check them myself. He even offered to install one for me. Again, here was the guy that was so nice and polite, yet I opted not to take him up on the offer. Instead, I decided to install my own. I got one that required a phone app and had infrared ability. I still need to get it delivered to my new residence. Instead, I had the new camera delivered to my post office box that I set up when I moved in. Once I installed it, I could do nothing but wait. Then, I waited some more. Actually, I waited about a week or so. And nothing. Perhaps I was losing my mind. Maybe what I'd seen that morning was just me dreaming. That could have explained what I'd seen. I was asleep when the second instance occurred. I was sleeping when someone woke me. It was my phone. My cell had several notifications from the camera app. I sat up in my bed and clicked on the first notification. All I could see was what looked like two eyes that appeared off the deck of my tiny house. I skipped past it, assuming it was a deer. The second notification, though, was that of a shadow, but I couldn't make out what it was. The third notification, I clicked on it, and there was nothing there. I clicked on the last one, and it was completely black. I was annoyed, but I went back to sleep. The next day, I had to go into the city for work. We had some big meetings that required me to show up in person. Sat in a large auditorium taking notes from the CEO about security changes we had to make on our work computers. I was trying to pay attention when my phone dinged. I looked down and there was another notification from that camera app. This time, I saw what looked like a woman with shaggy hair and hardly any clothes on. She was standing, staring at my patio doors. She wasn't moving, she just stood there. Within a few moments, she had moved closer, but I didn't see her walk. She disappeared. Then, in the background, it looked like something or someone was standing behind her. At that point, the camera went black. I can't tell you the feeling I got from watching her. I didn't know if she was flesh and being, a ghost, or something entirely different. I drove home after my meeting in a state of panic. I was concerned with my safety, but also wondered if I was overreacting. It may be a curious camper from one of Dave's other rentals. I pulled onto the property. I saw Dave, and he waved as I drove past him toward the drive next to my newly created tiny house. That is when I saw something strange. One of the planter boxes I had set up on the patio railing for some herbs was now knocked over. I picked it up and cleaned it the best I could. I noticed someone standing behind me and turned to see Dave shaking his head. "Looks like we got raccoons. You gotta be careful when you plant things. That is why I said no gardens. I can't tell you the number of times we tried, but the missus and I never could get anything going. We tried putting fences up around it, but whatever lives out here always got to it." I thanked Dave and watched him return to his house and go inside. I placed the planter box back on the deck railing, hoping it would stay put this time. That is when I noticed something else. There was what looked like a hole under my tiny house. Could it be an animal? I'd have to set a few traps and relocate whatever it is, I guess. I certainly didn't need an infestation of groundhogs or rabbits. I put my briefcase inside the house, locked my door, and went to the shower. I was standing in the shower for a while when the water suddenly shut off on me. What the hell? I grabbed a towel and went to investigate. When I went to look outside to see what could have stopped the water, I saw a man standing on my deck. Only it wasn't just any man. It was Dave. Only he didn't look like himself. He looked disheveled and broken, with a furious expression on his face. "Hey Dave, is everything okay? The water shut off." I stood standing there, half naked. Dave said nothing, and then walked around the other side of the house. I followed him, but this was the crazy part. He disappeared. He completely disappeared. I'm trying to figure out what to make of it. The water came back on the second I walked back into the house. Felt awful for pissing Dave off, but something didn't feel right. I asked him about it the next day when I went into town. I was driving in my car and stopped him while I was carrying animal feed to his cows. "Hey, I just want to apologize for anything I could have done to make you angry," I said, looking at him. Dave just stared at me, puzzled. "Sorry? I don't think you've ever done anything disrespectful. You pay your utilities, take care of things around here, and pay your rent for the next 10 months. You must have been mistaken," he chuckled. "No, when the water shut off, you stood on my patio and looked pissed." "Kurt, I have no idea what you were talking about." Now, it was my turn to be puzzled. I have no idea what I'm supposed to think. Could Dave have multiple personalities? Does he black out on a regular? I don't think that's the case. I don't really know where to go from here. I'm not terrified, but after my conversation with Dave later that night, I was awoken again by the app on my phone. At that very moment, it gave me a live feed of that woman standing outside. Still only, when I looked out onto my patio, nobody was there. The next day I noticed that the hole near my patio looked bigger than it was before. That was about 3 weeks ago, and so far, no new weird occurrences have happened. I'm not sure what to think. If anything new happens, I'll be sure to write more. It started after my sister disappeared, and I wish I'd noticed sooner. Mom tried to tell us, but we didn't listen. We thought she was crazy, and she was. But she was also correct. We should have listened. We should have done something. But it's too late now, and it doesn't matter anymore. I'm alone. All I have left are wishes, dreams, and memories. Each is a punishment and a reminder that it started with me and will end with me. We moved 3 years after Marie disappeared from Philly to a rambling farmhouse in the suburbs. It was composed of tilled land and towering trees. Our nearest neighbors were deer and far too many bugs. The move was long overdue, and we thought it would help us heal. But to Mom, it was a betrayal. She wasn't wrong. But it was also about self-preservation. We had to put Maria to rest so we could live. We couldn't cling to the hope that one day she would turn up at our doorstep and walk in. Mom didn't talk to Dad for months, or to me. She locked herself in her room, and whenever I saw her, she looked right through me. It hurt, of course. Why wouldn't it? When I told Dad, he sympathized, told me to give her space. But I noticed he would no longer meet my eyes. I missed my family, and I missed my sister. What could have happened to her? I wish I could shut down my mind. I was tired of hurting every moment of every day, and I was tired of imagining my sister buried under a pile of dirt, waiting for us to find and unearth her bones. She came to me at night. I could hear her singing from the woods. She pressed her palms against my window, leaving imprints surrounded by frost, and when she smiled, her lips quivered, and her eyes shone like starlight. She whispered my name through the night, and she had so much to say. She spoke of enchantments, taught me curses, and sang low and sweet. It's not real, I told myself. You're being stupid. It's just the wind in your imagination. But the wind doesn't know my name, and my imagination can't leave scratches on the window. I tried to forget it. I told myself it had been a dream. And after a while, I convinced myself because the alternative wasn't possible. But then I found Marie's locket on my windowsill, coated in thick black mud. She would have never taken it off, not willingly. And even though I'd told myself for years that she was gone, I'd repressed the hope but not abandoned it. And now there was no more. I lost my mind that day. I ran to the fields and screamed until my throat was raw. I lay on the itchy grass and stared at the sky, watching it darken and the moon bloom. The fields glittered with lightning bugs. I chased and captured them, cupping them in my hand, ripping their wings off, and watching as the glow they held dimmed. It made me wonder how long it must have taken Marie to die. If she had just laid there, accepting her fate, feeling the life drain out of her. I crushed them and stared at the luminescent smear on my palms and stuck my fingers into my mouth. I sucked on them. It was my fault that Marie was dead. It had been me who pressured her to go to the party. I knew she didn't want to go. It wasn't her thing. But I needed a designated driver. It'll be fun, I had persuaded. Are you going to waste the rest of your life watching TV with Mom and Dad? So she had come. And I smoked and drank and smoked and drank. I passed out, and then I woke up. I had 20 missed calls from Marie, and twice as many from my parents. My heart dropped into my stomach, and I tried my hardest not to throw it up. I knew something was wrong, and it was all my fault. It was all my fault. I helped Dad get around the house because that was the only time he gave me attention. The ladder we had was old and terrifying, but he insisted on using it, so I held it still as he cleaned the gutters. I stood in his shadow feeling sick. I imagined him falling and cracking his head open at my feet, his brain spilling and his eyes weeping blood. I was relieved when he finally descended, but the thought of his mangled body had never left me. I dreamt of Marie that night. She stood in the corner of my room looking at me. Her hair was tangled and full of bugs and earth, and her lips had rotted off, revealing her gums and teeth. I asked what she wanted and begged her to go away. She just smiled and stared at me, and then her eyes rolled back in her head and revealed empty sockets wiggling with maggots. Sometimes I smelled blood in the air, and that's when I knew Marie was nearby. I know Mom sensed her too. On the rare occasions we encountered one another, she would look at me, terrified. I imagined Marie clinging to my back, caressing and tracing my face with blood-stained fingertips. I lost Dad during the height of summer. I found him sitting in the kitchen, staring at a corner, his eyes unfocused and full of tears. "She's here," he told me. "Asha, your sister, is here. I can see her. We shouldn't have left her. We shouldn't have left her. We need to find her." And then he got up and left, the door banging shut behind him. He would be gone for days and come home with dirt in his pockets and eyes red like blood. He would sit at the table and cry and talk to Marie. He apologized to her. She wanted us to find her, and she was upset that we'd given up on her. The days grew longer. Summer felt endless, and she grew angrier by the day. A storm blew in. Rain lashed the windows, and the wind shook the house. We went outside after it was over to ensure there was no damage. We looked at the house, and it gazed back at us with hundreds of pairs of eyes. It had been papered with the missing posters of Marie. Her gaze was accusing. "Have you seen me?" the posters read. "Yes." The ground was soft and sprinkled with teeth. I picked them up while Dad collected the posters. His mouth twitched and his eyes were cold, and I knew he was gone. As I'm writing this, his body lies crumpled under my window. I heard the crack as his neck broke on impact, and I know I'll never forget the sound. Mom has barricaded herself in her room. Occasionally I hear laughter followed by wailing. Nothing matters anymore. What does matter is that Marie is here, and she's waiting for me. The window is open, and I hear her. She's singing and laughing, her voice warped by time, dirt, and larvae. She emerges from the woods, beautiful and dark. She gazes up at me and smiles. The moon is bright tonight, and the sky is full of stars. I run outside and try to touch her face, but she pulls away from me and runs back into the woods. I chase her, and around me the trees vibrate and the air shimmers. I am going to find her. It has all led to this. I know what to do and where to go. I will sift through the dirt and unearth her bones, and I'll shroud myself in her hair. We will wait for the sun to rise and say goodbye to this world. If death is the only way we can be together, so be it. There's nobody left to haunt, and nothing left to grieve. There's only the end. I was out in the front garden sweeping leaves one afternoon when a red-headed kid rolled up on his bike and started talking to me. "Hey, I'm Max. What are you doing?" he said, grinning. I couldn't help but notice and stare at the gap in his smile. He had a front tooth missing, and it made him look like a little bit of a hillbilly. "I'm Danny, and what does it look like I'm doing? I'm sweeping leaves." I was a little frustrated because I wanted to be inside watching TV, but my mom insisted I complete my chores first. Doesn't she understand that doing my chores first means I miss my shows, which in turn renders the reward of getting to watch the TV useless? Anyway, this kid Max strikes up a conversation about bikes and his favorite shows, etc., etc. Turns out he's actually pretty cool. "You want to come hang out at my house sometime? I've got a whole den set up where we can watch movies and play games." He spoke with such an infectious energy, I couldn't resist. "Where do you live?" I asked. "Literally like 2 roads away. The house with the green roof," he replied without hesitation. Green roof? All the houses in the area either had a red or blue roof. I don't remember ever seeing a house with a green roof, but I guess I don't pay much attention to roof colors. "Alright, well let me finish up here and I'll go get my bike." I finished sweeping the leaves into a night pile and then bagged them up. Then I took the broom into the kitchen where my mom was sitting talking to my aunt. "Alright, I'm done. I'm gonna go over to Max's and hang out for a bit. I'll see you later." "Okay, hun. Well done. Have fun." I could tell she wasn't listening. When she and my aunt start getting into one of their deep conversations, they're oblivious to the entire world. I put the broom away and went and got my bike from the garage and met Max out in the front of the house. We rode around the neighborhood a little bit, racing and talking about school and girls and our lives in general. I don't know what it was about him, but I felt like I'd known Max for years. Eventually, we decided to head to his house. He wasn't lying. His house did have a green roof. He went in and it was beautiful. They were clearly a well-off family. Everything was clean and modern. Not like our house where everything was old and every room was full of Dad's clutter. Not to mention the constant noise of my sisters fighting and my family always coming over for a chat. Max's house was quiet and peaceful. "Where are your parents?" I asked. "Oh, they're out of town," he replied. He seemed a little sad, but I guess being a kid at home alone can be a little lonely. No wonder he stopped and struck up a conversation. I felt even more glad I'd come over to hang out now. "My den is set up in the basement. Let's go," he said as he took off through the kitchen, opened the basement door, and ran down the stairs, leaving me to catch up. Again, he wasn't lying. The basement was full of games. A pool table, a sofa, a TV, fridge. It was a proper little man cave. "You any good at FIFA?" he asked, chucking me a control pad. "Am I good at FIFA?" I snapped back. "You'll have to find out, won't you?" We both rushed to the sofa, ready to get into some proper gaming. After an hour or two passed, and I'd whooped his butt at FIFA about 10 times, we got bored of playing games and decided to explore the basement a bit. At the far end were a bunch of boxes, a washing machine, a furnace, books, and other junk that they had stored down there. We were going through some of the old boxes, trying on clothes and messing about when Max found an old VCR. It was covered in dust and had a few tapes with it. Max said that some of the tapes might be worth something to collectors or something like that, so we should hook it all up and try them out to see. The first couple of tapes were recordings of old TV shows from back in the day. Then, Max found a tape which seemed that there was nothing on it but complete static. It showed nothing until we forwarded it right to the end of the tape, where all this weird stuff started happening. We saw Max sitting on the sofa, then lying on the ceiling, then sitting on the sofa again, but on fire this time. And then he vanished completely and the video went to static. I looked at Max. "What the hell was that?" He shrugged. "I don't know, man, but let's try it again." I wasn't too keen on it, to be honest, but Max is one of those people whose enthusiasm infects you, and you can't refuse. "All right, let's watch it again," I said, shaking off my slight apprehension about it. We rewound the tape and played it again, and things got even stranger. We saw ourselves this time, from above, and with sound, but it was low-pitched, like it was slowed down. "Hey, that's us just a minute ago finding the tapes," I shouted while pointing at the screen and elbowing Max in his ribs. "Yep, looks like us all right," said Max calmly. "How is this happening, man? Like, what the hell is this?" All of a sudden, the camera angle changed to being in front of us, as if a camera was inside the TV. But it seemed far away and blurry and was slowly zooming in and becoming clearer. I looked at Max, and Max looked at me. "Bro, what the?" I was dumbfounded. Max got up off the sofa and went closer to the screen. And at the same time, the Max on the screen got up off the sofa and moved closer to us. "Looks like we're live now," Max shouted as he jumped back onto the sofa next to me. "Bro, this is insane." The fear had gone and I was smiling. "This is kind of fun." We both sat there, transfixed on the screen as the picture continued to zoom in. Little by little, I could see more detail in the image. The images in the room, the logos on our clothes, the features on my face, but not Max's. His face was kind of gray and blurry, so I stared harder, moving forward a little more to focus as the image zoomed closer. Still blurry, no, smoky. His face was moving and waving like it was smoldering, and his body seemed to have smoke rising up from it. "Hey, Max, what's wrong with your..." I started as I turned to him, only to see him levitating upside down, covered in a cloud of thick black smoke. His head was looking straight at me, but with no facial features at all, only thick black smoke where his face should have been. "Ah, what the hell?" I screamed and scrambled off the sofa into the corner of the room. Max began spinning around and moving closer like some kind of faceless smoking whirlwind coming to suck me in. "Get the hell away from me. Stay back, Max. What the hell, man?" "Don't worry, Danny. You won't burn. Trust me. Don't you want to live forever?" Max's voice sounded all warped and wavy like a chewed-up tape. "What's happening, Max? Stop it, please." "There's no going back, Danny. This is real life. You can't rewind it now." No, I shouted and held my hands up in front of my face to protect myself from whatever Max was about to do. Suddenly, I heard the sound of the VCR chewing up the cassette. "No, not the cassette. This is the master copy. No, Max screamed. His voice sounded exactly the same as the tape being chewed, all warped and reversed. Then, he was gone, and I was standing in the basement alone, the TV showing nothing but static. I rushed up the stairs and out the basement to find the whole house empty. Literally nothing in there. No carpet, no furniture, no paint on the walls. Nothing. It was just empty, and it was run down and decaying. It's just an old house. I opened the basement door and looked down the stairs. Nothing. No sofa, no TV, no VCR, nothing. I ran for the front door, grabbed the handle, and flung it open so hard it hit the wall and a glass panel cracked and fell to the floor. I ran all the way home without stopping or looking back once. When I got in, I was out of breath and my throat was dry, so I went straight into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. My mom was still in the kitchen, talking with my hand at the table. "Where the heck are you coming from, and why are you breathing so heavily?" "Mom, I was over at Max's, and we found this weird VCR that showed him upside down, and then Max turned into a whirlwind creature thing and was about to kill me when the tape got chewed up and he disappeared." My mom looked at my aunt and burst out laughing. "Kids and their imaginations, Gilly." My aunt chuckled. "Tell me about it. This one never stops," my mom sighed, rolling her eyes. "I swear to you, go over there right now and you'll see this house is empty and Max has completely disappeared," I demanded. "Firstly, you need to calm down and remember who you're talking to, Danny. Secondly, who is this Max kid you're on about?" I could tell my mom was losing her patience. "Max is the red-headed kid that lives over on Walter Close. You know, his family has the house with the green roof," I tried to explain. "Wait, green roof?" my mom asked, puzzled. "Yes!" "Danny, you know I encourage you to be yourself. Watch your little programs and be free with your creativity, but you're taking it too far now. It's disrespectful to speak ill of the dead." I could tell she was annoyed now by her tone. "The dead? What?" I was confused. Was my mom losing the plot too? "Yes, the dead. Mr. and Mrs. Colburn moved away about 3 years ago after their son, Max, got trapped in the basement during a fire. They managed to put the fire out before he was burned, but the roof collapsed, trapping him in the basement. By the time they got to him, he had died from smoke inhalation." I remember thinking how tragic it was. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "No way. You're wrong. I've been riding around and playing in the basement with Max for at least the last 4 hours. You don't know what you're talking about, I shouted back. My aunt looked at my mom with her jaw wide open. She'd never seen me speak to my mother like that before. In fact, I'd never spoken to either of my parents like that before. Daniela Amanda Mason, that's enough. Go to your room and think about the way you're behaving, young lady. My eyes were welling up with frustration because I know what I saw. It was no issue trying to argue with my mom, though. So I stormed up to my room and threw myself on the bed and began to cry. I lay on my front, sobbing into my pillow for a few minutes before I had to shift my weight. Something in my pocket was digging into my hip. I rolled onto my side and put my hand into my right jean pocket. There was something small, solid, and oddly roundish, but rectangular at the same time. I pulled it out. What the hell? I screamed as I threw the thing across the room. No way, I thought to myself as I got up and stood over it. A tooth. Someone's front tooth. The road was desolate and dark, the void being broken up by street lamps that resembled stars. I kept my head down as I walked on the uneven pavement, desperate not to make eye contact with the moon. I couldn't see the face it was making at me, but I could feel it. The face was angry, scowling at my incompetence. I felt 3 taps on my shoulder and turned around to see a man holding a cardboard sign that said, "I have no teeth." His torso and limbs were pencil thin, only existing to bear the weight of hanging rags. "Spare change?" he asked. "Sure." He dropped to the floor and his head cracked open like an egg as it hit the concrete. I knelt down at the mushy mass of flesh and frowned. "What about the change?" The gray matter resting in his fractured skull began the decomposition process. 2 days passed and a puddle of rot took its place. In the center was a silver dollar. "Thanks." I pocketed the money, then continued my walk down the street. The street lamps were a color, but I'm not sure which one. A street lamp can be any color, and who am I to judge? Some people like to go around saying that things are aqua blue and magenta, but when I ask them what it means, they don't know how to answer. The ball's on people. What I did know, however, was how this made me feel. And to be honest, it pissed me off. "Hypocritical," said the man in rags. "What? Why criticize others for a practice you do yourself? How is assuming the color of the street lamps any worse than assuming the face of the moon? At least they took the time to look." "Whatever, didn't you die or something?" "Yes, but that was before." "Did you know what you're smoking?" I looked to the left and there it was, a hand that was presumably mine, holding a cigarette. Moths drifting in the place of the smoke. "Yes, I did." "And you're just okay with that?" Yes, I am. By the way, do you actually have no teeth?" He smiled in response, a toothless set of gums, glistening off the moonlight. For the second time, I continued my walk, this time looking up. The moon was frowning. She wasn't mad, just disappointed. I turned left and entered the nicest restaurant in town, Waffle House. Sitting down, I placed my silver dollar on the table and asked for another pack of cigarettes. There wasn't anyone there to serve me, but I trusted the reliability of Waffle House. On my right sat no one, and on my left was the stranger in rags. His impossibly thin fingers fidgeted with themselves. The sound of clicking bones resembled a Geiger counter. The sign was leaning against his stool, this time with new writing that spelled out Do not give me cigarettes. Hey man, about earlier. Let me try one of the cigarettes. Wait, why? I thought you didn't approve of them. Truth is, I never had one. I don't know. What about your sign? Don't worry about that. Just let me try one. I think you should do it, pitched in no one. Reluctantly, I handed the stranger a cigarette. He picked it up and turned it in front of his face, examining every angle of the paper tube and its contents. Eventually, he popped it into his mouth and started to chew in pure ecstasy, closing his eyes as he licked his cracked, bleeding lips. After swallowing, his face split open in what resembled a smile. The bodies of twitching moths lodged between his teeth. Thanks, kid. I really appreciate that. I'm 43. He got up and walked toward the exit. As he turned around, I saw 2 spots on his back bulge and pulsate. Not wanting to be rude, I said nothing. Finished the food on my plate, spit out the filters, and stretched as I got out of my seat. I walked out and took the route home. An anxiety-inducing shiver ran up my spine and tapped the back of my skull, screaming in my ear to run. I looked up and all the street lamps were white. That is, if white was a color to begin with. Hypocritical, don't you think? Damn it, what do you want from me? I turned around to see the stranger, just as thin but somehow wildly different, his eyes now a pair of bulbous mosaics. Look, man, just get me a few more cigarettes, that's all I want. I promise I'll leave you alone. I have no reason to hurt you, and I know you have a few, so just give them to me. Okay, if I give you one more cigarette, you'll leave me alone, right? No, man, I want the whole pack. You don't even need it, man. You got bad lungs. I can smell it on you. 1. Take it or leave it. I didn't actually think he'd be satisfied with the deal, but I needed a way to get him off of my back. Yeah, man. And hey, look, sorry about being so pushy earlier. Just pop one out of the pack and hand it to me. I'll leave you alone, man, I promise. Okay, just this one, I said, fully knowing 1, or 10,000 for that matter, could never be enough. Forcing my entire will to my hands in hopes to keep them still. My right hand pushed back denim folds and entered my pocket. My fingers dug deeper until they found themselves wrapped around a small cardboard box. My forearm extracted the pack and slowly pried open the lid. My hands, starting to lose their nerve, shook as it plucked and pulled at a carefully selected paper tube. Here, man, 1 cig, just like we agreed on. He snatched it from my hands and shoved it into his mouth. Cocoons hung from the roof of his mouth, replacing what were once teeth, and crushed it in pure euphoria. I picked up my pace and walked as fast as I could without running, praying I didn't draw its attention. The sound of snapping bone pierced my ears, startling me as I dropped the box of cigarettes and looked back. He was already in front of me, devouring the spilled tobacco and bug wings littering the pavement. I stood petrified in horror as the thin white line that spoke cracked open to reveal 87 human teeth and a bright red tongue that protruded from the demon's mouth while dancing through the air. Its flesh pulsated and twitched, almost as though its very existence was straining. The thing stood up with an angular hunch, gangrenous and pain-striking limbs twitching in anxiety. It charged on all 4 limbs, but 4 became 6 as the creature grew a pair of spotted brown wings. The thing took flight and followed me into my home. The place was desolate except for the sound of our pursuit, crashing furniture and heavy panting mixed with screams. I looked back to see 143 teeth lodged into the creature's gaping maw. The thing's tongue lolled out, drool splattering the carpet floor as we approached closer to my room. The sound of crashing feet and hot breath grew closer. But after entering my room, I slammed and locked the door behind me, then approached the blinds. I looked down and the street lamps weren't a color at all. This unsettled me, but I found it peaceful in a way. Terrified of the punishment to come, I looked up and saw the moon, smiling with 32 human teeth. Don't get drunk and break into cemeteries in New Orleans. And if you do, don't piss on any tombs with a bunch of X marks all over it. I did that 6 days ago, Saturday, and I've died every day since. After leaving the cemetery that night, I stubbed my foot stepping up on a curb and broke my neck on the wall outside of a bar. I dreamed of a woman that night. She wore a white dress and stared at me. But I couldn't have dreamed anything. Do the dead dream? Sunday morning, I woke up in my bed with no hangover. I had a clear head, which was rare for me in the mornings, but the details of the night before were still hazy. I checked myself out in the mirror but didn't see any signs of damage. I remember tripping on the curb when the wall of the bar came rushing towards me. I was so drunk that I didn't put out my hands to catch myself or anything, and then blackness. Pushing the thought away, I started my day. I left my apartment and walked down the block to the corner diner. Most mornings I needed coffee to chase away my hangover. No hangover that morning, but the craving was still there for coffee. I sat at the counter and ordered. A tall, very dark-skinned man was sitting at the counter. He was dressed in an old-fashioned, dark purple suit. He had coattails and all. He stood as I sat down, said good morning, and made his way out of the diner. "Be seeing y'all later," he said to the diner. Everyone ignored him. I turned and looked at him as the door was slowly swinging shut. He tipped his top hat at me as he was putting it on. His smile was yellow, just like his eyes. As the door swung shut, I could see him lighting a cigar. I think he winked at me. After my coffee, I walked over to Jackson Square. Maybe the fortune tellers could tell me something. They all turned me away. The real ones did, at least. You can tell which ones are real. After that failure, I walked back toward the river. A carriage horse got spooked by some tourists lighting firecrackers and caved the side of my head in with a kick. Monday, I woke up again in my bed. This was really happening. I searched the news, but there was no stories about a horse killing anyone on Decatur Street. I gave in and decided that the only thing for me was to get nice and drunk. I was sober for a whole day. That was an accomplishment for me. Well, sober for a morning, at least. That night I tied one on. I couldn't get enough. At one point I think I remember that tall guy from the diner buying me a drink. "What's this?" I asked as he handed me a double shot of something dark. "Oh, it's always rum for me, baby," he answered, before throwing back his shot. I didn't care. I would have drunk anything that night. "Be seeing you around," he said, before fading into the crowd of the bar. I was shot in the back while walking home. They killed me for the $9 I had in my pockets. In my dreams that night, the lady in white was sitting on a short stool with her back turned to me. I walked toward her, but she never turned around. No matter how close I got to her, no matter how far I stretched my hand to her, I couldn't touch her. Tuesday, I decided to stay in. If I don't go outside, I can't die, I thought. My mistake was to drink a fifth of vodka and try to take a bath. I must have passed out because when I came to, the water was freezing cold. I slipped getting out of the tub and bashed my head into the rim of the toilet. I still couldn't reach the woman in white. She was working with something in her lap. Every time I walked around to see her front, to see what she was doing, I would just be looking at her back again. Wednesday, I believed the bed would be sanctuary. Surely nothing bad can happen to me in bed. Things were going well, until I smelled the smoke and heard the sirens. The fire must have started in an apartment below me. I threw open my front door and ran for the stairs. They collapsed as I made it to the landing. Since I was on the top floor, I had nowhere to go. Resigned, I walked back inside. People were staggering out of my building onto the street below. A crowd formed across the street, and some of them were pointing up at my window. The tall man was standing amongst them, smiling up at me. He tipped his hat to me as my floor collapsed and I fell into the inferno below. I found out what that woman in white was working with. This time she was standing. She had a dead chicken in her hands. With a quick motion, she twisted and wrenched the head from the chicken. She began chanting and moved in a circle, making a ring of blood on the ground around her. I called to her, but she ignored me. Right before I woke up, she glanced up at me, glaring into my eyes. By Thursday, I'd given up. Whatever was happening to me was out of my control. My room was like it always was. No signs of a fire. As soon as I got up, I went straight for Bourbon Street because the bars never closed there. With an empty stomach, I got to work. Even on Bourbon Street, drunks aren't tolerated very well before noon. So after getting kicked out of the third bar, I sat down on a curb with a big beer. The tall man sat down beside me. We were quiet for a few minutes before I asked him, "Why is this happening to me?" No, don't you worry about that, Cher. Just a few more days and it will all be over. Now if you hurry, there's a party bus carrying a bachelorette party about to cross Bourbon just a few blocks that way. He pointed down the street. The driver is a man a lot like you. He was out way too late last night and might not have all his faculties about him. I nodded and stood up. The tall man called to me as I walked away. Au revoir, mon ami. The bus plowed right through the stop sign. He was right. The driver never saw me. The bus squealed to a halt too late, with me trapped underneath. I could smell my skin melting on the scalding undercarriage. The driver ran out and saw what he did. He turned away to vomit as the party rushed out of the bus to see what was happening. A pretty lady, wearing a sash that read bride, saw me and dropped her tall, green novelty drink. The last thing I heard was the screams of her and her bridesmaids. The woman in white walked toward me in my dreams that night. She held a dusty bottle with no label that was full of some type of dark liquor. She stood in front of me and took a big pull from the bottle. With a look of disdain, she held the bottle out to me. I reached for it, but she pulled it away and spat the liquor in my face. She began chanting something in French Creole and walked around me in a circle, stopping periodically to tease me by holding the bottle out in front of her. Every time I reached for the bottle, she would pull it away, take another swig, and spit it back into my face. Her chanting continued in between her taunts. Finally, she stopped and stared at me with hatred. "Time to wake up, fool," she said. It wasn't English, but I understood her. She took one long pull from the bottle. Blood began to dribble from between her lips, and she spewed it back onto me. I shot up from my sleep, and I was horrified to find my face and chest covered in blood. I cleaned myself up and spent the rest of the day wandering aimlessly around my apartment. Eventually, I headed out and walked around the corridor until late into the night. The tall man would be waiting for me in the doorway or window of a bar, always with a shot of rum held out and one for himself. I just ignored him and walked on. Well, after midnight, near the edge of the corridor, I saw her waiting for me on a distant street corner. "Last chance, mon ami," said the tall man from the doorway of a quiet bar. The bar was dark because it was closing up. It was hard to make out the details of his face, but it looked like he was wearing white paint in the shape of a crude skull. I took the offered shot and drank it down slowly, savoring the burn. She rounded the corner and I followed. As I walked, I would lose sight of her, but she would always be there when I turned a corner or a car passed by, just standing and staring at me from a distance. Eventually, I found myself walking next to a tall white wall. An opening in the wall revealed a huge, ornate iron gate. I stopped at the gate, and it slowly swung open, creaking on its centuries-old hinges. Of course, back where this all began, the cemetery. My feet carried me down the boulevard of this miniature city of the dead. She was gone again, so I scanned the side alleys for her. I saw a flash of her white dress between the crumbling tombs, so I ventured deeper into the cemetery after her. She was waiting for me next to a tomb. The tall man stood there with her. When I stopped in front of them, he turned and removed the name plaque of one of the openings to the crypt. The stale air that issued out smelled of must and decay. He bowed low and gestured me inside. I began to weep, but still I climbed inside. I turned over onto my back into the tight space and looked out. He smiled at me and said, "It's been a pleasure, truly." He lifted the plaque back up and sealed me inside, covering me in sweet darkness. Finally, I could rest. If you've just come to the end of this video, I want to give you a big thank you for watching or listening, whatever your preferred method is. My name is Zach, and I'm the narrator for Fear Harbor. If you have any stories that you'd like me to narrate, please let me know down in the comment section. Otherwise, if you feel so inclined, please consider hitting the bell icon, which will help you stay up to date with us on when we post videos. Hit the thumbs up button and subscribe. Thanks so much and have a great night.